We do this with our personality life path mentorship. We've seen clients have incredible breakthroughs. Oh my gosh, well, no wonder I'm fill in the blank, fighting with my spouse, having trouble with my career. There's this shadow. It's been pulling me from the shadows, or it's been pulling me from my uncertain parts.
When we're talking about the decision making or the judging functions, when you think of how does it keep me safe, think of it as how does it keep me from making the wrong choice, the wrong decisions in my life? How does it keep me from emotional or psychological grief?
Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This is part 2 of a 2-part series.
Yep. I'm
going to just call it a series.
I think we're allowed to.
2-part series. We're talking about this is going to be a mouthful, the Jungian cognitive functions of personality and how they keep us safe.
Yes.
And on the last episode, we talked about 4 of the 8 functions. This episode, we're going to talk about the other 4. And just for a quick reminder, in case you're brand new, cognitive functions is the math underneath personality types. So you have your 4-letter code. For example, I'm ENFP in the Myers-Briggs system. You're ENTP, Antonia. You might hear the term ESTJ or ENFJ, whatever all these little 4 letters running around are. The cognitive functions are the math behind those 4 letters that we call dichotomies. And these functions tell us how we learn information and make decisions. And the preferred way that you make a decision or learn information is basically what your personality type is. That's what we call personality type. And this comes from Carl Jung, over 100 years ago, developed these. And this is the backbone of how we have helped our clients, our students, and we've worked with personality type for over a decade now, well, coming up on a decade and a half. This is the work that we do, and we expand understanding the functions. We use a CAR model to understand how it is for your personality type. You want to learn more, head over to personalityhacker.com/CAR model. It's a great resource for you to understand more about that. So that's the framework of what we're talking about. On the last episode, we talked about the 4 ways that we learn information or perceive our world and the qualities of those and how they can keep us safe. In this episode, we're going to tune into the judging functions. Doesn't mean we're judgmental. It means it's the way we judge information, how we make a decision, a judgment call on what we're going to do about the information we perceived or took in. And so there's 4 of these. And this is where conflict can happen too, because people sometimes have disagreements on what we should do about the world that we live in. Like we might have a worldview, but then now we have conflict. Well, I think we should do it this way. No, I think we should do it this way. And often the way we believe we should do something or the decision we should make, it really comes down to type. It comes down to our personality and what makes sense to us. And we're going to have decisions that make more sense and not sense to us based on our wiring.
Right.
So let's frame this. How else do we want to talk about this, Antonia, about keeping us safe?
Right.
Let's just frame it that way and make sure we understand how we're going to approach this today.
Well, when you're talking about the perceiving functions, what it really comes down to is even though some of the functions keep us physically safe, they really are trying. The way they keep us safe is by keeping us regretful of how we're experiencing life. And I think the same thing is the case here when we're talking about the decision making or the judging functions. Is when you think of how does it keep me safe, think of it as how does it keep me from making the wrong choice, the wrong decisions in my life? How does it keep me from emotional or psychological grief? How does it keep me from, basically, making terrible choices in my life? And each of the decision-making or judging functions is designed to have you look at a different area of decision-making or a different aspect of life we have to make a lot of choices around.
Yeah.
And ensure that we're not, that we're not going to do something that we regret. So it safeguards us, not just physically, but it also safeguards our minds and our hearts if we use these functions well. And I do want to reiterate something we mentioned in the last podcast, which is one of the challenges when we talk about functions in this way is we're kind of talking about them in their best form. We're talking about them at the core nucleus of what they're trying to accomplish, and also when they're being done well. And a challenge can be when you hear this content to sort of track it or like immediately transfer it over to somebody in your life that has one of these functions as their preferred function and go, well, they're not doing that, right?
Yes.
And go, well, how could it be that? Because I have somebody in my life that uses that function and they're doing it. They're not safe. They're actually quite disruptive, or they're quite, they play fast and loose. And just remember that a function is not the same as a user of a function. It's the same thing as going like, this is what hammers do, and go, well, what are you talking about? I have somebody who used a hammer and they used it to bludgeon somebody to death. They didn't use it to say build a beautiful structure.
Yeah.
And so you have to remember that that these are opportunities. As we're talking about these functions and how they keep us safe, we're communicating an opportunity. We're communicating a way that you can build a relationship with each of these functions, even if it's not a preferred function for you, that can help you ameliorate your choices in life, even if somebody in your life is using this function and they are not using it in this way.
Don't judge the minivan if a 5-year-old's driving it.
That's right.
The minivan can be a good car. Just because the 5-year-old's driving it, that's not how everybody drives the minivan.
Yes, Joel, minivans can be good cars. You're bringing in a personal conversation into the podcast.
Let's just get past that. Let's talk about these functions. Let's
You don't
jump
give
right into
context?
it. No, let's jump right into it.
I'll give some context.
Well, when somebody comes to a live event or joins our program, ask me about the minivan. It's another incentive to join a program.
And Joel's in my long-term conversation or
I'll tell you what this
discussion around
means.
minivans.
I'll tell you what this means. Just bring it up at some point in the future. And I'll be like, huh? What? Minivans? What? And I'll be very confused when you bring it up.
Yeah, I won't even know.
But you'll just have to like remind me of this episode.
No,
and
just say,
I'll remember it.
Antonia said it's a long-term conversation between the two of you, and then I will remember.
That's
for sure.
true. You'll definitely remember. Let's just randomly pick introverted thinking.
Okay.
We call it accuracy.
Yeah.
This is the preferred judging function, or the way decisions are made for all TPs in the Myers-Briggs system. So ENTPs, INTPs, ESTPs, and ISTPs will use this as a preferred strength. This is how they make their best decisions using this cognitive function. It's also used as an uncertain process for all FJs in the Myers-Briggs system. So ENFJs, INFJs, ESFJs, and ISFJs will have this as part of them. It'll be important, but deeply uncertain. It's like, am I doing this well? Am I making good decisions using this? I don't know. I've got a lot of uncertainty here. I don't really know what I'm doing. Or if I do know what I'm doing, I'm still uncertain. A lot of question marks. So let's talk about introverted thinking and nicknamed accuracy. We call it accuracy for a reason, right? It's kind of looking for the most accurate information possible.
Yeah.
The most accurate representation to base our decisions off of the most accurate way to see something.
Yeah. Or it's using accuracy as a metric.
Correct.
For how well, how good information is. And information doesn't just have to be conceptual. It can also be, like competency building.
Yes.
Like turn your wrist this angle when you're trying to throw a 3-point shot. Is that good information? Well, I hit, I swished it. It went into the net. So I guess that's good information. That was accurate.
A lot of people see this though as that pushing the, actually kind of energy where it's like corrective. And so I think a lot of people are like, how in the heck can that be protected? How could that help us in life? It just seems annoying and corrective all the time.
It's terrible. It's a terrible function. To be
Critical
with.
Sometimes people even think, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So as we mentioned last episode, the extroverted functions are for living life and experiencing things, like bringing an energy to the outer world. And the introverted functions are for processing what has been lived. So introverted thinking would be processing thought. Now, that doesn't seem as confusing as, say, introverted intuition, right? Processing intuition. But processing thought is effectively retreading the similar ground to ensure that the information that one has taken in and is playing with is distilled down to its most true core, its most accurate principle. So it's seeking information that is that doesn't change regardless of the context. Now, because most information does change based on context, then there's usually very few core principles that introverted thinking users have. They don't have a ton of them most of the time if they've really put some effort into how they're using this function. Most things are, basically most data is context-based. But some data doesn't change no matter what, and that's what it's looking for. And you could almost say that it's hyper-focused on premise-level thinking. What is the premise that we are working upon? What's the substrate information that we're using? And so it has a tendency to, because whenever we're processing something, when we go introverted, it's like we have all the time in the world.
Yeah. When
we're in an extroverted space, well, now we're connected to the rest of reality that we have to sync up to, and it goes fast, right? So extroverted functions tend to be speedier, they tend to be faster, and because they have to be interoperable to some extent,
yeah,
right? They have to go, oh yeah, time is a thing, or oh yeah, I guess I have to get that accomplished. It tends to be more obviously it's more action-based. But when we bring something in and ruminate on it and we start processing it, now we have all the time in the world, because time doesn't necessarily have to exist inside of us. In fact, we're time travelers. We even made an argument for this in the episode called Cognitive Functions in Time.
Yeah.
Which I like to reference because nobody ever listens to it. It's my favorite episode. So anyway, so we make this argument that we're kind of time travelers inside of ourselves. Time is basically a construct inside.
Yeah.
And so because of that, introverted thinking has all the time in the world to perpetually question premises. Like, am I right about that? Is that actually how that works? I mean, I know that I thought about that 5 years ago, but now that I'm reevaluating, I'm not sure if I agree with that. So it's correcting its own thinking, or should be correcting its own thinking all the time. So how does this keep one safe? Well, one could say that the purpose of introverted thinking is to keep us from being duped. Like, that's its job. Its job is to keep us from being sitting ducks to other people's thought processes or premises. If an individual presents an argument,
yes,
and it sounds really good, all right, I think that's the definition of the word specious, right? It's a specious argument. It sounds really good. But the person has not questioned the premise, and something feels off, even though it sounds right.
Yes.
Introverted thinking's job, or accuracy's job, is to get to the premise and go, yeah, but I don't know if your premise is sound, right? Are you sure you've thought about this? And this includes premises that entire cultures of people will not reevaluate, that will just make assumptions around. So introverted thinking's job is to keep us safe from other people's faulty reasoning.
Now, people might experience it as very dangerous in doing this. This is what I think, and it's very unique. I think out of all the functions we're going to talk about today, to me, I think this is the one that could be misunderstood the most. It can look unsafe in its attempt to be safe. So I think about when we were kids, Antonia, I don't know if you remember this, there was a big news article about the ACLU in the United States, a group of lawyers who would help protect people's rights, sued and protected a bunch of neo-Nazis' rights to protest and be neo-Nazis and like have their Nazi flags out and have this terrible, I would consider a terrible ideology. Mm-hmm. They actually protected this to be able to happen, like this protest or this like event that was happening when we were kids in the 1980s. And I remember thinking, like, I told my parents, like, how can this be? How could anyone think that's a good idea to protect people's ability to spread hate and to talk about hate and all this? It seemed dangerous to me as a child. As I grew and matured, I understood how principled things work. I understood the reason the ACLU did that is they had a principle of free speech, void of content, because they thought the principle is if we have content color, who we allow to speak or not speak, well, now we've got refs. They're throwing flags and pulling strings, allowing some people to say something and other people not to. Right. So if we want to be consistent with this core principle, meaning I have the right, if I want to say something good in the world, to always say it, well, that means by definition, in a principled way, we have to protect people to say horrible, hateful things too. Right. And so the decision was made to stay with the principle. Something that seemingly was unsafe was actually attempting to ensure that we were allowing everybody to speak and everything was equalized. Yeah. Now, I think the world's very different now. I think people, even the ACLU themselves, might have a different viewpoint. I'm not going to go down the political route here, but it seems like things have changed a lot to say people do believe there should be refs deciding who should be able to speak and not speak. Right. It shouldn't be a principle anymore. Right. It should be a topic. Yes. Right. It's a topic now, no longer a principle. Right. But introverted thinking or accuracy is attempting to always get down to the principle. And because of that, I think a lot of people feel like it's not loyal. It maybe is unsafe. It's allowing things like neo-Nazis in the 1980s to say, like, what? What are you doing? This is nuts. So it doesn't always have a lot of friends or partners in its endeavor. Right. Sometimes it could be very lonely and feel isolating to the user often. But this is the attempt. The attempt is to be principled about it, not topical about it.
Yes. And the thing that was being protected in that case was not the speech.
That's right.
It was the right to speak. And as a person who uses introverted thinking or accuracy, this is like one of the very few hills I'll die on, is the right to free speech. Like it's so incredibly important to me. It's like I try not to touch anything political. I don't understand how free speech is ever a political question. To me, it's not political. It's like
it's a human right.
It's like foundational to being a person.
It's a human right.
Yeah, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so it's one of the very few things that I'll be like I'll just own. Like I'm, like I you'll have to pry it out of my cold dead hands, basically. And the reason why is introverted thinking or accuracy needs to be able to talk. It needs to be able to express and hear itself say its ideas in order to do the work of reevaluation, because the function is meant to keep us from being duped, but that doesn't mean that we're not being duped. It's meant to be a safeguard against it. So I have to be able to hear myself say things out loud. I have to be able to hear myself talk about it. I have to be able to communicate it to go, is that actually what I think? Right? Like, now that I'm hearing it out loud, maybe it doesn't seem that way as much. And if people are not allowed to say things, well, then they just have their say in their heart, so to, quote unquote. And then we can't debate each other. We can't sharpen the saw of our thoughts together if we are afraid to communicate what other people might believe are terrible, terrible thoughts. But then we are being duped, right? If we can't have debate, if we can't if we can't correct each other's thinking or our own thinking, then we don't have any safeguards against being, safeguards against things like misinformation or things like, other people's arguments or whatever. Like, we have to be able to express. So introverted thinking or accuracy, even though it's not always conceptual like that, that's an example of a principle, a core principle. But there's other core principles that are just like principles of science or principles of, like.
Does the Earth rotate around the sun,
right,
or does the entire universe rotate around the Earth?
Yeah,
There's a big question at one point.
Right. Or like I said back at when I talked about the basketball, analogy, when I referred to like just what angle you're going to make your wrist as you're throwing a 3-point shot. How do physics work, right?
Yeah.
These are principles. And sometimes those kinds of concepts are considered dangerous because they can threaten bigger institutions. In fact, actually, you're right. It is kind of lonely being an introverted thinking user.
Yeah.
Because you're looking at things, you're meant to look at things without bias, which means that you don't actually care what it shakes up. If there are entire industries built around things that are, very untrue, and it's your life's work to discover the truth about something, and you don't even know that it's where the truth is going to lead you. You have no idea. You don't have a horse in the race about where it leads you. The only horse you have is the truth. And then you discover something that's true that then threatens industries or religious paradigms or political paradigms. Like, if the truth is incredibly inconvenient, well, introverted thinking or accuracy makes sure that you stay with the truth, even if other people are threatened. So how does it keep you safe? Well, it certainly might not keep you safe from other people's ire, but it keeps you from being duped. It keeps you from believing untruths. It keeps you from thinking things that are that are actually going against nature, basically, because truth and nature just kind of do this, like they kind of shake each other out, and truth it always follows nature.
Yeah.
So so that's its point. That's how it keeps us safe. It keeps us safe from other people's agendas, other people's biases, other people's arguments, other people's really terrible thought processes, premises that need to be questioned in order to continue, to have inventiveness or the ability to improve or to become more competent or skilled at something. This is the function that keeps us on that track.
Yes.
And ensures that we're not just handing our brains over to other people.
Well, it helps us not be gullible.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know somebody. I mean, you're listening or watching right now. You know somebody that's extremely gullible. They're probably missing a lot of this energy in their life.
Right.
They probably aren't asking enough of the hard questions about what's really true at the baseline of all of it. They're
Premise
kind of
level. Yeah.
They're buying what's in front of them maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
So this can help us with that.
Unwilling to question even beloved premises.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that a beloved premise can be just as wrong as a hated premise. And so it keeps us from holding on to beloved premises that are not serving us.
So let's flip over to the other function.
All right.
Extroverted feeling or harmony, we've called it. Now, this is the preferred function for all FJs in the Myers-Briggs system. So ENFJs, INFJs, ESFJs, ISFJs are going to use this as a strength to make their decisions. And it's going to be more of a challenging, uncertain function for all the TPs. So ENTPs, INTPs, ESTPs, ISTPs, we just talked about. Their strength is accuracy or introverted thinking. And they're not going to have as much certainty with extroverted feeling or harmony. Let's talk about extroverted feeling or harmony first. It is a function that's about harmony between humans, the vibe, the let's all get along. Let's make sure we can get each other's needs met and have a good experience together and be friendly. And this human experience and this ride we're on is not an isolated event. We have to do this together as a group. So we might as well have ways of being, like manners and the way we engage with each other, that makes it more pleasant. It's not so awful all the time. Like we can actually laugh and enjoy each other's company and get along and attend parties and have experiences together that are human relational experiences. And we feel good about those as a collective. So this is a beautiful process. It's very important. It's a way that all FJs make their decisions based on what creates a harmonious result in the experience that we're having as humans.
Yeah. It's very fundamentally mammal.
Yes.
Right. Or like social, many mammals are social creatures.
Yes.
And it's very mammalian. It's very like core to our existence.
And if we could say that introverted thinking or accuracy is focused on principled truths, we could say that extroverted feeling or harmony is focused on social truths. Mm-hmm. And those don't have as much substrate as a principled truth. They flex and flow based on the dynamic needs of the group and the environment that group is in.
Right.
So the size of the group, the context, the intimacy of the people in the group, how well they know each other, all these factor into what the quote social truth is in the moment.
Right.
Right. And so it needs to be more flexible and adaptable than just this principle is never changing no matter how I feel about it. It's a little bit more, it depends.
Yeah. ... Yeah, absolutely. Well,
which is a wonderful thing. It's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need that level of flexibility. So it's an extroverted function, so it's meant for living and interacting with the outer world.
Yeah.
And feeling in Jungian terms is not just our emotions, although our emotions are valuable information and other people's emotions are valuable information. It's more based on like our values. So it's we're living, we're not just living out our values, we're connecting on values, right? We're like interacting with other people based on sort of these shared values that we call culture, right? Mm-hmm. Like shared values end up being, like these are our traditions, these are our holidays, these are the important events in our life, these are the things that I show up for, for other people. I just got an example of the difference between, say, European cultural values versus American cultural values when it comes to graduation ceremonies. In the United States, somebody's graduating, like everybody shows up for graduation, right? Extended family, especially if you're graduating from college.
Is it because we didn't expect it here in the U.S.?
Yeah.
We're like, wow, man, you did it. Never saw it coming. Come on, everybody, let's celebrate.
Right.
Europeans just expect it more.
I guess. But it's like, it's not as big of a deal. It's like, okay, does that mean that Europeans don't think it's important to graduate? And it's like, no, of course they do. But that's not, it's not something that they have decided to bring the whole family around. And for some reason, Americans did. So it's a communication of like gatherings and when we're going to meet with each other and how we're going to interact and all of those things. It's like it communicates. I mean, clearly in America, there is a higher value placed on it than in Europe, even though I'm sure Europeans think it's important. There's a higher social value placed on it in the United States. Maybe there's a higher effectiveness value placed in Europe. I don't know. But there's a higher social value, a familial value around it. And so everybody comes out and it becomes sort of a big deal. So all of that said, it's about interacting and engaging with each other in these moments. And like you said, the vibe between people, the rapport between humans, the energy we're pumping out and they're receiving and they're pumping out and then we're receiving, and we stay in that vibe. So I think it's easy to see how this keeps us safe, but to just formalize this, the function keeps us safe by ensuring that we don't alienate the people that we rely upon, the people who we depend upon and who depend upon us. It ensures that we are safe from animosity. We create a positive energy, a positive energetic interchange. And that rapport keeps us from basically clubbing each other over the head and stealing each other's property all the time.
Yeah.
If we can humanize each other, if we can see each other as real people with real needs, then we're not going to take from each other. We're not going to steal. We're not going to see that person as like, well, tough to be them. I guess that's terrible, but it's none of my business. we're going to see it as each other's business to take care of each other. And so in a lot of very real ways, this keeps us physically safe, but it also keeps us emotionally safe.
Yeah, I think in normal times, this is where politics comes in. I think politics is the art of compromise. And so often what you'll see is people that have to go to some function, maybe a official function, that have radical different worldviews. They can't agree on anything, and that they can show up to a function and shake hands and be pleasant with each other and pleasant with the participants that are there that also might disagree with them or whatever. We have to tap into this with humans. I have to move through the world with tons of people I disagree with all the time, and I have to be pleasant, and they have to be pleasant with me. And we don't have to, but we choose to culturally. And I love that choice. I'm glad we choose that, because if we just focused on our disagreements all the time and we started to amp those up more and more, and we stopped looking for the things that we have in common, right? The humanity we have in common, we'd be fighting constantly. And I'm sure somebody listening or watching right now has been a household or a culture, like a localized culture that's been like that, where there's been a lot of toxicity or infighting, because you can't just, sometimes it requires you to ignore all those truths that we looked at with accuracy, right? I can't dig up every possible thing I disagree with you on. Maybe we're just not going to look at that. We're just going to put the music on and we're going to dance.
Yeah.
Right. And we're just going to get along right now.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to oversimplify it, because I know it's a much deeper process than that, but it's important that sometimes we don't focus on our differences.
Yeah. Vital, actually.
And because we are dependent on you, even if I disagree with you radically, you're a human and I am dependent on you in the ecosystem of life. I need your perspective represented, even if I strongly disagree with it, because somebody's got to represent that.
Yeah.
So it feels like it's important that we learn and we have this function available to us.
Yeah.
And maybe we've lost a little bit of it in modern times, where we don't have it as, or maybe we've lost some of it and it's like decorum, but it's a little over amplified sometimes. And it's like,
well, I think what has
requirement
happened,
of, what do you call that?
Consensus.
Sometimes it bullies into consensus.
Yes.
In the modern world.
Yes.
But I think that's getting corrected right now.
Yeah. And I think the function is really important, to your point, to keep us from pushing away the people who sustain us. And that can be everybody in our country, right?
Yeah.
We sustain each other by not seeing each other as the enemy. We sustain each other by having a cooperative culture. And so this idea of if you don't agree with me, then we can't break bread is it's a
bad road to go down.
Very undermining perspective.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that you have to pretend to agree, right? Introverted thinking or accuracy is the other side, and that's the function that keeps us from being duped. It's the function that communicates out loud, no, this is my opinion. It's also a function that knows it doesn't matter how much you agree with another human being. If you go down far enough, if you dig down far enough in your each perspective opinions, you're going to find things, even fundamental things you disagree with. So if you'll only break bread with people who agree with you, and you might even think that there are these are important issues. It's I guarantee that if you'll only break bread with people who agree with you, even on things you think are important, you will always dine alone. Always.
I don't even agree with myself half the time.
That's right.
I won't even dine alone. I just won't dine. I won't break bread at all.
Exactly.
Inner conflict. I'm I believe this sort of and this also. They're conflicting.
That's exactly it. And I don't actually trust people who don't question themselves.
Yeah.
I don't trust anybody who has not updated their thinking pretty frequently. I think every 6 months to a year, you should have a massive paradigm shift. That's just my personal opinion. Maybe not a massive paradigm shift, but you should be learning new things that reframe you.
Leveling up.
You should be leveling up in your thinking. Now, of course, that's just because that's how I think, right? That's my personal opinion. But and a person can disagree with me, and I'm fine with that. But I don't really. If a person is so convicted that they will not shift their perspective or opinion, or even listen to somebody else's opinion that disagrees with them. And they not only feel that way, but they also will not have a relationship with somebody that disagrees with them. They won't question themselves, but they'll question other people endlessly. I just do not trust that kind of mind. Yeah. I think that's a dangerous mind, actually.
So remember, these come as polarity opposites. Extroverted feeling harmony is always going to be associated with introverted thinking or accuracy. They come as a polarity. In a way, they're measuring truth. They're measuring principled truth versus social truth. and both truths are important. And it's really the harmony and the balance of the tension point between those two things. Because it doesn't matter how hardcore you're focused on principled truths, there's a social truth component to how it's going to show up in the world, how humans will experience it, at least.
Well, and there's a truth to the fact that you need other humans. Otherwise, you will die.
And it doesn't matter how much you're about harmony and getting needs met and trying to keep the discord from entering the frame. People do have differences of opinions, and they're going to speak those, and sometimes those penetrate through the harmony you've created, and that's, that's needed too. But we have to have both of these things. We have to understand how these have tension and they're represented. We're going to have a strength toward, well, me and Antonia. Well, you have this, but I don't have this at all. It's in my shadow. It's kind of abstract for me more. But you have this more represented in you, obviously, because you have TP preferences. But I think we have a balance of this. You're going to have one that shows up more in strength than the other. So I think that's what it's measuring. Are you ready to move on to the other two judging functions? Any other comments about this?
Yeah, I don't have a memory. Did you already say which types use extroverted feeling or harmony as a preferred function?
I did. All the FJs.
I guess I'm just in my own brain. Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, I did say that.
All right.
So let's talk about the other polarity now, the other two judging functions we haven't talked about. Let's go ahead and start with the introverted one. Introverted feeling. We've nicknamed it authenticity. This is the preferred function of all FPs in the Myers-Briggs system. ENFPs, INFPs, ESFPs, and ISFPs will use this as their best way to make decisions in their lives.
Yep.
And this is looking for what is me. Like the person that's using it would say, what's me? What is really my identity? What is my role? How I see myself in this situation? What's the most authentic way I can show up into this space? What's the most me that can be for this decision? So anytime you're making a decision, you go, well, I'm not the type of person that eats XYZ food. That's not me. I'm the type of person that eats this type of food, ABC food. That's me. And so that's you making a decision based on how you are in the world.
Right. And
it means that you're going to be tied into your identity, things about how you feel about things inwardly, like what makes you light up, what motivates you. You're going to start tracking maybe your own motivations and other people's motivations. You're going to tune into things like people misrepresenting themselves, pretending that they liked this food here maybe when they really authentically didn't. That's going to possibly bother you if this is your preferred function. So these are the qualities of introverted feeling or authenticity. Again, focused on things like motivation and why we do what we do as humans. So in the frame of helping protect us or keep us safe, let's talk about this.
Yeah. So it's introverted, so that means it's processing, and it's feeling, which means it's values-based, and, how did something make me feel? Like you said, it's making decisions based on how is this making me feel? So it very much stays true, or at least its desire is to stay true to the self. And so it makes sense that the way that this function keeps us safe is by ensuring that we don't betray ourselves. We don't take actions that will make us feel like we compromised who we are or we lacked personal integrity. It ensures, in the same way that extroverted feeling or harmony keeps us in cooperation with others, and so we can lean on each other. Introverted feeling or authenticity ensures that we stay in alignment with the self, that we can maintain a good relationship with ourselves, that we're not betraying who we are in big or small ways.
We could also maybe look at it as a mechanism that helps protect us against codependency. Because if I'm not betraying myself, that means I'm a sovereign person. I'm sovereign in who I am, and I don't have to do anything else to prove to myself that I am a sovereign entity.
Yes.
And so now I don't necessarily need to be in a codependency with somebody else because I'm complete in who I am.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I don't need other people to cooperate with. It just means I'm not codependent with them.
Right. You've got two people who have a strong sense of sovereignty or independence, and now you can create interdependence, not codependence. Right.
That's right.
Yeah. And so it helps us enter healthier relationships. It keeps us from feeling hollow, right? Like in our choices. We might not be betraying ourselves, but we might be making choices that really don't align with ourselves. And so our experiences are hollow. Our experiences just feel meh, right? This is not what I want. This is not what I desire. This is not how I want to show up in the world. Yet here I am. So, you can either shrug and keep doing it, or you can start listening to your inner wisdom, inner voice that goes, we actually need to be headed that direction. Or, it's like an inner light of staying not just true to oneself, but also listening to oneself and knowing what the self actually wants out of life.
Now, I didn't mention this when I talked about this, the preferred for the FPs, but this is going to also be part of the TJs.
Mm-hmm.
So ENTJs, INTJs, ESTJs, and ISTJs are going to have this represented, but it's going to be a lot more uncertain.
Right.
And it might be pulling from behind you. It's not your strength. And so the considerations here, it could seem like, Antonia, this is a very dangerous function. If I'm a TJ, how protecting me, are you kidding? All it does is it creates confusion. It might make me feel like, is this really me? I'm unclear on my identity. People tell me this is me, but now they're projecting onto me. I don't like that. So how could a TJ think about that in a safe, like, how can this help me connect that?
Well, I mean, in the same way that an FJ can think about introverted thinking or accuracy, all right? It's there to protect you from your worst impulses.
Yeah.
I mean, it might not feel terribly certain. And we have recorded podcasts, I would say, Joel keeps saying in the last 2 episodes, he's like, these are functions that are less certain, or these are uncertain functions. If you want to understand what that means specifically for your personality type, we recorded a 16-part series called How to Love Yourself As ... all 16 types. And we discuss what it means to have your functions in what we call a descending order of certainty.
Yeah.
And how to set reasonable expectations based on some functions feeling less certain than other functions. So I recommend going and listening to that one if you want a little bit more information about how this works.
Excellent.
But it's still, we haven't talked about extroverted thinking or effectiveness yet. But when we do, you'll see that this is a function as a balance, right? As the other side of the polarity, as something to integrate that keeps one from compromising oneself for outer world impact, right? Or to get something accomplished. Like there's a lot of, what's the old sort of disturbing phrase when I think about it? There's a lot of ways to skin a cat. There's a lot of ways to do the same activity or get the same result.
Yeah.
Introverted feeling or authenticity ensures that the process is as aligned with the self as the result is, right? As the goal. So this is the part that ensures that you're not just doing things to do them, right? Or accomplishing things for its own sake. You're doing it because you want to, that it means something to you, that it's aligned with a personal desire. And it's also not taking you off of the map of your own personal conscience, right? Like you're not doing things that harm you spiritually in order to get an effect.
So we could say that introverted thinking or accuracy, we talked about before, helps us not be gullible, ensure that we can look at truth and question premises. So we don't just get caught up with the group in a gullible way. Well, this can help us not get caught up in the mechanisms of the machine. Like we're not just going to be a cog in the machine. We are reminded of our unique humanity.
Yeah.
It's about our sovereignty. I'm sovereign outside of anything a role I'm doing. I'm my complete self. And it doesn't just get caught up in that way.
Yeah. I think if I was going to make a corollary, if introverted thinking or accuracy keeps us from being duped, introverted feeling or authenticity keeps us from being compromised.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about extroverted thinking now. So this is the preferred function of all TJs in the Myers-Briggs system. ENTJs, INTJs, ESTJs, and ISTJs are going to use this as the best way to make decisions, their strength in making decisions. And all FPs are going to have this as a little bit of an uncertainty part of themselves. They're going to, ENFPs, INFPs, ESFPs, and ISFPs are going to be like, how do I think about this? It's a little less certain for me. Extroverted thinking, we've nicknamed it effectiveness. It's about measurements and results. Like it's about progress on a timeline, a sequence of I do A plus B plus C equals result D.
Yeah.
I get an output for it. It's looking for impact. And I actually don't care how I did the steps in the order I do them. As long as I get that result, I really want that result, extroverted thinking might say. And this is a wonderful process because it helps us do things, like actually do things a little different than extroverted sensing we talked about, where it's direct action. It's doing things in a project way, creating a list, measuring, managing resource, ameliorating things. It's project management, if you will. Writ large in a lot of ways. And now it does other things too, but that's a good way to see it if it's a new function that you're just attuning to.
Yeah. Extroverted sensing or sensations, sort of direct action taking, has woven in limitations because not everybody that
was on the last episode we talked about this.
Exactly. You can't always get big things done by simply taking the most direct route. most of the time, big things require many hands. It requires resource management,
External coordination.
external coordination.
A lot of different people and
That's right.
resources.
Gantt charts, right? Like requires a lot. And
Yeah.
this is the function that ensures that that can happen. So it's the thinking process externalized or lived, right? So how do we live thinking? Well, we do that by taking ideas and solving problems and pushing it out to the outside world. So you could say that both in the same way that the feeling functions are both sort of tuning into values, because it's trying to figure out how things are making people feel. And if it feels off, then that probably is something that should be addressed or reevaluated. The thinking functions are very much there for problem solving. Right? Like we've got a problem and we got to solve it, right? Like how does this work? Introverted thinking does it more conceptually. It theorizes on problems, on how to solve them. And it can get very good at it. And it can take a lot of time to figure out a very elegant solution. But extroverted thinking or effectiveness is focused on the fact that the solution was implemented and happened, not just on the elegance of it, but the actual result.
And measures the result.
And then it measures it to ensure it.
Yeah, I think the maxim for extroverted thinking or effectiveness is if it can't be measured, it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's not real.
Yeah.
I think that's an extreme statement.
Yeah.
That's not totally true, but
Aristotelian.
at least looking at extroverted thinking in that frame or that lens, yeah, that is true there.
Yeah.
Like it needs to be measured. We need to know how much resource we spent, what the result was,
Yep.
how much ROI we got for that spend,
Mm-hmm.
and all of this. And so I guess I'm sure people are already patterning, if you're listening or watching right now, how this can protect us or keep us safe.
Yeah, well, it ensures that we're not spinning our wheels and burning all of our resource. Like it keeps us safe in a very real way. You know, you burn all your resource, you don't have anything for later. There's this app game that whenever I'm playing, like, I don't know, like Candy Crush or whatever. Actually, it doesn't matter what app games I play. It's irrelevant. But there's this advertisement where there's a game that you're supposed to, there's like a thing at the top that has a bunch of coins and then all these mechanisms that have like pins in them where you can remove the pin and the coin will come down on one side or the other side. And then there's this really pitiful looking mother and child that are freezing to death. And like it shows them in these wretched conditions. And this little game you're supposed to play is supposed to like dump coins into their pitiful hands or like a little jar. And then they can apply that resource to, say, you know, getting a fire or like getting shelter or whatever. And the reason why, yeah.
I feel like that is designed purposely to manipulate FJs. Like there's this little family in need. Solve the TI puzzle real quickly to get the need met. And it's like, oh, and it's like
sometimes she's pregnant.
Like that's like the most like, oh, I got to get this, like help these digital creatures out, get their needs met, and like it's like this anxious run.
And then there's this not very complicated usually, but this mildly intricate like sort of puzzle you got to solve in order to do it. It's really, every time I say it, I'm just like, well, first of all, there's no way that the game is like this, but the second of all, I'm just like, what is even happening here? But if you don't do it well, or afterwards, you can choose where to spend your coins that you just dumped into their jar. And they'll give you the choice of like, do you fix, they're inside of the shelter and snow is coming in through this broken window and there's like a furnace there. And it's like, do you choose first to fix the window, or do you choose first to put the, you know, like a fire in the furnace, right? And so you get to decide. And if you choose wrong, well, if you put the fire in the furnace but the window wasn't fixed, well then now the snow is just going to come blow your fire out, etc. And I'm like, this is the most basic version. Actually, it's the most basic version of extroverted thinking or effectiveness. Yeah. Which is how am I going to apply my resource?
Limited resource.
My very limited resource to ensure that this family doesn't like literally die of the elements. And I'm not sure why
they're not
going to
really die, Antonia.
Yeah, they're not going to actually die because they're actually pixels.
They're not real.
They're not real. They're not real. Like she's not pregnant. They're not real. But it's an illustration of how, first of all, sort of how like in our bones this kind of thinking is. Like extroverted thinking or effectiveness is sort of woven into our bones so much that we'll play these kinds of app games endlessly in order to align resource at different places. But it, as silly as I think it is, at the same time, it's one of the few reminders we get in this contemporary Western world that resource management keeps us physically alive. it keeps us physically alive. Now, we have so many safeguards. Our extroverted thinking or effectiveness has built tons of institutions and structures and infrastructure and politics and government and resources.
We run out, we just print more.
Yeah, well, apparently that's what we do.
It's easy.
Like,
you just print more money.
And you don't even have to print it. You just put little ones and zeros, and now we have more. But really, we have all these safeguards to ensure.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that even in the world that we live in, like our world, the Western world, the contemporary Western world, it doesn't mean that people don't still go to bed hungry. Lots of people go to bed hungry.
Absolutely.
Because of the limits of their resource. So extroverted thinking or effectiveness, its job is to keep us safe from the wrong resource allocation, to be smart about how we're thinking about these things. This is substrate level life, right? This is like if we don't get this right, we're probably hurting, right? Pretty bad. And so it's unsurprising how this function keeps us safe. It keeps us safe from not just making the wrong decisions about resource, throwing them at the wrong things, spinning our wheels, hoping for a different result. And then, as you mentioned, making progress. So we don't just fix the problem, but we create a beachhead. And then we can maybe progress a little further until finally we're not having to choose between the furnace and the broken window. But eventually we're at a place where we're creating a nice life for ourselves.
In our personal life path mentorship on the TE week, the extroverted thinking week, I always remind the students and clients, I'm like, you realize we've made a progress benchmark where in the United States, at least, I can go to almost any city in the United States, and with a few exceptions, I can turn on the water and I can drink clean water directly out of the faucet without getting sick.
Yeah, it's like modern miracle.
Virtually for free.
It's magic.
I mean, no one charges me hardly ever for it.
Yeah.
Like, it's so cheap and so ubiquitous and so expected that I don't even think about it. I take it for granted that I can pretty much drink out of any faucet in the country.
Yeah.
And that's an achievement. That's a benchmark that's been hit. Now, it can always fall back from that if it's not maintenanced, right? The ameliorate or the resource has to be maintained. That's a pretty big achievement, I think, for effectiveness or extroverted thinking to accomplish that.
It's kind of unbelievable when you think about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, that's a very rare experience.
I mean, there's a lot
for most of the world.
Not just most of the world, but all of history.
Yeah.
It's like, this is we're very spoiled having this experience as a human being for the last 200,000 years.
And there's other countries that have developed this too, but it's...
Well,
it's
I just mean anybody who experiences it.
Absolutely.
In this time period.
And I think that it's just it speaks to the power of extroverted thinking, being able to actually accomplish something and deliver on results consistently.
Yeah.
Since I've been alive, like my whole life, I've had this as a reality.
Yeah.
So it's not even been something new. I mean, this is just how life was when I was born.
Yeah.
It just always has been here.
Yeah.
So this comes as a polarity, extroverted thinking or effectiveness, along with introverted feeling or authenticity. And if we could say that the accuracy and harmony are really attuned to truth, principle truth versus social truth, I think this is really attuned to impact, personal impact, collective impact. It's the way we can accomplish big things in the outside world, but also the impact that I have and the impacts I feel in my life, like how it impacts me and makes my identity feel. That's introverted feeling or authenticity. And then the external impact of resource management and deliverables and measuring those things. Yeah. So this is an impact polarity. And if you have one, you're going to always have the other. It's going to be, one of them is going to be more of a strength. The other one's going to be more uncertain for you. And then some types like FJs and TPs have these two in their shadow. They're not really necessarily focused on them. Now that impact of extroverted thinking forces us to be focused on it because we all have to make money in some way, at least now at the time of this recording. We all have to do something of value to get value back. And so we all either take to that or we kind of grumble against it often, but sometimes it can be demonized because it seems to be running everything, but we forget, man, it's the substrate everything's built off as well. Yeah.
Well, and it has the same, this polarity will experience the same consequences to one-sidedness as introverted thinking and extroverted feeling. If that polarity, if you don't have that in balance, then you're either hyper-focused on calling everybody on everything and alienating them, right? Introverted thinking or accuracy. If you're just not going to play nice with anybody.
Well, actually,
right? That's that meme. Then you're now pushing away the people that you rely upon and depend upon. And that's just silly. Like as a animal, as a social creature and an animal, as a mammal, it's just silly. So why would a person do that? That doesn't make any sense. And yet somebody will hyper focus on that function and become the well actually guy, and then just look around and go like, I'm super lonely. Why doesn't anybody want to hang out with me? And then on the other side, for extroverted feeling or harmony, you've got somebody who might be really tied into everybody and very social and very well liked, but not have a way to separate from the group when their thinking is flawed, or when somebody is using them for ill intent, when that person's arguments sound good but are actually a really kind of, detrimental agenda. And then you've got that person who's now being duped, right, and being taken. So you have to have those two represented. In a similar way, introverted feeling authenticity and extroverted thinking effectiveness have the same kind of relationship to each other and require each other to feel balanced. If you're totally focused on progress and improving your life or your lifestyle, or getting ends met, or like getting a goal accomplished, like we said, there's a lot of different ways to get a goal accomplished, and some of them are roads to hell, right? They can be very spiritually undermining. They can be death by 1,000 cuts to your soul. Like I can think of people who have done very well for themselves selling who they are, right? And feeling hollow, and like they just, they have a chunk of change in the bank, but now they have no relationship to self. They don't even know why they did it, and they're horrifically unhappy that they made all these compromising choices in order to just make, to hit a certain metric or number in the bank or whatever, right? It doesn't even have to be money. It can be something else. Education,
project, something,
status, whatever. On the other side, you get people who are so hyper focused on themselves and making sure that like everything they do is 100% in alignment with, how they feel about it, not really asking themselves if they have any value to give, just making an assumption of intrinsic value, right? That they just are an amazing person and everybody should be subsidizing them, that they and have an attitude about having to show up providing value in any way, that they just just existing is the value that they give to the world, not needing to justify it in any way, not needing to accomplish anything, not needing to make progress in their life, not needing to actually do anything. And unfortunately, those people find themselves not just under-resourced, but usually resented because everybody else now has to subsidize their laziness effectively. That's what they're seen as lazy people. They're seen as people who don't show up giving anything, just taking. So both sides of these are they're dangerous in the same way that both sides of introverted thinking and extroverted feeling are actually dangerous if you are one-sided. The balance of them is how each side keeps you safe from something, but them in conjunction together will keep you safe from, safe from the challenges that come with insisting on only staying on one side. So each in isolation keeps you safe, but them together keeps you the most safe. And that's the same with introverted feeling and extroverted thinking. Yeah. Like each side keeps you safe from something, but together they keep you safe from, they keep you safe from compromising yourself, and they keep you safe from not having any value to trade. You know what I mean? Like not being able to basically support yourself as an adult, not being fit for life.
Yeah. So I think that uncertainty, the part that's uncertain, that's why we get one-sided, is because there's a part of our personality that's there. We can see it. We feel uncertain about it, so we sometimes avoid it, and we just double down on our strengths, which can be powerful to really focus on your strengths. That's important. But there is some integration. There's some attunement to the things that we feel uncertain about. We can't just push them away completely. So again, if you're following along with this, I really recommend you checking out one of our owner's manuals for your personality type. We have 16 of them for all the personality types in the Myers-Briggs system, and it really helps with that balance. These tune into the strengths. You have two cognitive functions that are going to be the strength for you, the way you learn information, the way you make decision. But by definition, if you have those as strengths, you're going to have uncertain parts of yourself too, where you're going to be like, how do I deal with this? How do I overcome maybe some of the uncertainty? Maybe there's some skill you need to build there. Maybe you've built some skill there and you still feel uncertain and you want to balance that more. Those owner's manuals tune into your cognition in your car model, and help you have a relationship with your whole self, not just parts of yourself, not just the one-sided part of yourself. So there's a part of you that will help act as the translator. We help you develop that in these owner's manuals to have the strength parts of you talk with the more uncertain parts and be able to balance them out in harmony. And so that's the idea, is that personality type, we're all different, we're all unique, but there's ways to live a healthy life based on balancing these polarity energies that seemingly want us to always go one-sided with them.
Yeah.
So I recommend heading over and getting one of those owner's manuals for your type, because I think it's going to be a good starting place if you dive into that for these elements. Now, and I want to speak to that too, and you mentioned this, I think, before, Antonia. I just want to really lay this down, that just because somebody's using one of these cognitive functions doesn't mean they're using it well.
Mm-hmm.
They could be very one-sided. They could be ignoring parts of their personality that are uncertain to them and doubling down and getting really one-sided on something. And if you look at them as a representative of this, you might be disappointed. So look at what the function is designed to do to keep us safe, not just the person using it.
Yeah.
These are energies that we all have access to, some more than others, but don't conflate a person's use with the function itself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so hard to learn type sometimes, because that's how we have to learn it. We have to learn it practically through people that are representatives, but almost always, like, not everybody's representing things well. So you have to hold a little bit of space and go, okay, well, they might not be using it that well. That said, as you mentioned, two of the functions we talked about today, one of the polarities, are going to be what are called ego dystonic. We mentioned this in the last podcast episode. Ego dystonic means that you're not going to identify or relate to them inside of yourself. They're not in what's called the car model, right? We talk about the car model, the first four functions. And so those will be in your shadow, and you'll have a less conscious relationship to them. So when we talk about needing to balance all of these, and all of these functions keep us safe, that's not to say that we need to have them all perfectly balanced. It's not really something we can do anyway. So even if it was a noble goal, it's not accomplishable. So don't even try. But what you can do is you can integrate them into your personality. So the less preferred function, that's one that you actually can really strengthen and build a good relationship with, even if it feels uncertain. You can make some peace with uncertainty. And as mentioned, go find the episode, How to Love Yourself as Your Personality Type, in order to get more of a diagnostic in how your specific personality type can do this. The function polarity that you don't identify with, that feels like somebody else, one of the best ways that you can ensure that you're still benefiting from how it keeps you safe is to have representatives of this function in your life. People who are friends, family members, even if they're not using it exactly perfectly, they'll still be it's almost like they'll introduce the energy into your world. And you can pick up aspects of how they're thinking or how they're navigating or how they're using it. I've never met anybody who's using a function 100% terribly, right? Like, usually there's some gold to mine from them. And you want to make sure that you're tapping into that energy, even if you're not, quote unquote, developing that function inside of yourself, that you're tapping into it enough to get its benefits, or at least it's not a blind spot, right? It's not undermining you from the shadows. Yeah. So don't feel an obligation to get good at all of this. Feel an obligation to honor all of it. Like, don't have an animosity towards any of these functions. If you have animosity towards it, if it is undermining you, you won't be able to see how, right? Because you'll be disowning it and putting it into the chat. You'll just not look at it. But if there's a respect for each of these, an appreciation or gratitude for how it's trying to serve us, even if we don't see how it serves us in our personal life, that doesn't mean it's not there to help us out in some way. If we can just develop a respect and an honor and invite it into our world in some way, oftentimes you can find a way to benefit from how it keeps you safe.
This is so powerful, what you're saying. We do this with our Personality Life Path mentorship. The 8 weeks when we go through and we look at each function and we relate it to the client or the student's life, and we have them test it out in their actual life to see what the relationship is. We say at the beginning, you're going to be tempted to want to master or perfect all of these. That's how we are as humans. We want to be good at everything. You're not going to be good at all of these. Your personality type tells you which ones you will be better at, which ones are going to be more uncertain, which ones are going to be in your shadow. The goal is to understand your relationship to each one and give it its due honor in the way that it needs to show up for you. In other words, if it's the right time for it to show up, even if it's something that's in your shadow, well, it needs to be represented. And maybe that's through another person or through an event or something external of yourself. But still, you have to make space for that because we're going to be one-sided if we don't have a rounded life. So it's not about mastering it all. It's about providing space for all of it. And we've seen clients have incredible breakthroughs by realizing there were usually one or two big energies, one of these 8 functions, one or two of them, that are just completely missing. And they go, oh my gosh, well, no wonder I'm fill in the blank, fighting with my spouse, having trouble with my career. Or like I have all my
repeating the same mistakes.
Yeah, I have all my like cognition in line, but there's this shadow. It's been pulling me from the shadows, or it's been pulling me from my uncertain parts. And it's hijacking me. Thank you for helping me find this. And now I can give it some space. And not master it, but make some space for it. And now it's improved the quality of life.
That's all you really need for a lot of the functions is you just need to not resent them or push it away or like
hostility.
You just got to invite it in, you know?
Yeah. So if you've been following along, we'd love to hear more from you. And when you go over to Personality Hacker to get your owner's manual for your personality type and see if PLP, our Personal Life Path Mentorship, is open for enrollment, because you go enroll for that if it is. While you're there, leave a comment below this episode and the last one. It's a 2-part series talking about these functions and how they kind of protect us and hold us safe. What do you think? How's this showing up for you? We'd love to hear a comment, a question. Share your story with the way this shows up for you in your life directly below this episode. Come over, visit us, make your voice heard at personalityhacker.com.
And if you enjoyed the podcast, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and other Android platforms. And if you leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, well, I read every single one, and it's a little adrenaline shot, right? It keeps us going and makes us feel like, hey, yeah, this is the thing. People are listening and they're enjoying it. So we'd love for you to do that. And I haven't said this in a while, but we do have a book. It's called Personality Hacker, and you can get it at all major book retailers. Yeah, it's right there if you're watching the video podcast. And go grab yourself a copy if you haven't already. And speaking of the video podcast, which I didn't mention in the last episode, we do have a video podcast, and you might be watching us on YouTube. And if that's the case, you can subscribe, and hit the bell to let you know when new episodes come out.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.